Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I'm very pleased to be here in Singapore, which might be actually the place where the first smart society will be built. And I would say it's already on its way. So I'm going to talk about complex problems of our societies of today. So the problems of today are complex. And this includes climate change, the energy crisis, the financial crisis, conflict and war, but also the potential spreading of diseases all over the world, pandemics. Now the question is, can we actually solve these problems? And I personally believe that complexity science can help us to understand these problems and also to solve them. And first of all, we need to define what complexity science is about. This is about systems that are made up of many components. But a car is a many component system too. And basically, this is a complicated system, but not a complex one. Why is this? Because you can easily control a car. Yeah, you need a steering wheel, you need a gas pedal, and also a brake, and that's about it. However, the interaction of many cars produces phenomena that are difficult to control. Traffic flows that would produce traffic jams, for example, and an individual driver is not in control of this. We're talking here about complex dynamical systems, and these are difficult to understand. Why are they difficult to understand? Because there are a number of phenomena such as unstable dynamics and cascade effects and interdependencies, and I will zoom into this for a moment. So we're well familiar actually with this problem of complex system from weather forecasting. We all know that weather forecasts don't work for a month or a year or 2 years, and this is not just a matter of lack of data, it's a matter of the physics behind this kind of phenomenon. And the physics behind this is called turbulence. And it means that even slightest changes in the initial situation could lead to totally different outcomes. And that makes weather unpredictable beyond a certain time period. The same thing applies to deterministic chaos. That means not even with randomness in the system, you would have such butterfly effects that smallest changes could actually dramatically change the outcome in the system. There are also limits in control. So for example, look at this predator-prey system, a very simple ecological system, you could say. We assume a hunter wants the system to get into this situation. For whatever reason, he has figured out that's the optimal state. Now, while he's driving to this point, the system actually gets to this point over there. So something completely different happens. Or take this example over here. Assume that would represent a company or a society, and you want to change it. And then you take some measures, and in many cases it would turn out it doesn't change much. I would be frustrated and would think, okay, we have to increase the dose, you have to force it a little bit more to make it do what we want it to do. And maybe it still doesn't do what you want, so you force it even more, and you might eventually get to a tipping point where out of a sudden the system changes dramatically and unexpectedly, and it would behave in entirely different ways. And these kind of things happen when, for example, the former GDR was breaking down, or during the Arab Spring, or whenever there are sudden transitions. Would be also in the market when people stop buying cars, or when people sell their stocks or whatever, you know. Sometimes these transitions are quite abrupt. And so we need to understand this better. Let's look into this circular traffic. It shouldn't be difficult for drivers to control their cars. They all have a driver's license. They all see what's going on. So the question is, why are we still getting traffic jams as it happened over here? You can see it. So there's a traffic jam that propagates backwards, and actually once it's there, you never get rid of it anymore for a very long time. If you would ask drivers what was the reason for this, they would probably say, well, there was obviously a stupid driver in front of me who didn't know how to drive a car. But everyone would say that. In fact, there is a mathematics that allows us to understand these kind of phenomena. And these mathematical formulas tell us what's really going on. So whenever the density of traffic exceeds a certain threshold, we call it this a critical threshold. That means when the distance between cars falls below a certain distance, then traffic becomes unstable. That means sensitive to the slightest variation in speeds. Why is this? Because the next driver will have to respond to this, but that happens with a delay. And in order to compensate for the delay, this driver will have to brake a little bit stronger, and the next one even stronger, and so on. So there will be a domino effect, basically, and an amplification effect too. And in the end, drivers are stopped, although nobody wants this to happen. Now, traffic jams are just annoying. They're usually not extremely dangerous. Sometimes they are, but there are many systems in the world, in our society, in our economy, that show similar behavior. We call this systemic instability. And this example shows us that even with the very best intentions to avoid this from happening, even with a good overview of the situation, even with advanced technology, we would not be able to avoid this from happening. This system would just get out of control sooner or later if we operated in the wrong parameter regime, which is too high density. Yeah, Singapore, of course, has realized that, and that's why they have very high charges to buy a car, and they're trying to keep the density below this critical level, and to some extent it works, and to some extent it doesn't. But we need to be aware of these kinds of instabilities. And while, for example, traffic flows among pedestrians would self-organize beautifully under normal conditions, or not too high density. So you can see here the formation of lanes of uniform walking direction, and that is basically reducing friction between the different directions of motion. You might run into trouble if there is too high density, as we've seen it in a number of crowd disasters, such as the Love Parade disaster in Duisburg. That was supposed to be a happy music festival, but it ended in disaster. 21 people died, more than 500 were injured. None of them wanted to kill anybody. None of them wanted to be aggressive, and still it happened. So now, when complex systems get out of control, it could kill people. And it's doing this, I would assume, every single day. Like the financial crisis is actually killing people. Some commit suicide, others can't afford their health insurance anymore, and so on. So we need to understand these phenomena much better. Now, besides these amplification effects, there are also cascade effects. So a single event could trigger off other events. These kind of cascade effects are sometimes difficult to understand because the same cause could have different outcomes, because many of these processes are probabilistic. That means certain things happen with a certain probability, or they don't happen. And if they happen with a delay. Then also it could happen that the same outcome is produced by different causes. So it's really difficult to understand these causal interdependencies in such systems. But what is most important to recognize is that one event could trigger many events, and these could trigger even more events. And so that would easily get out of control. And here's an experiment which visualizes that. So you can see mousetraps, and each mousetrap there is a table tennis ball. We have a local perturbation in just one place. And you will see that this local perturbation can mess up the entire system. Now this experiment has been invented to visualize chain reaction as they happen in nuclear fission. And as we know from nuclear power stations, such processes are controllable. Yes, otherwise we could not use them to produce energy in a controlled way. But sometimes they get out of control, like in Fukushima, for example, or Chernobyl, or in other places too. And so these processes are difficult to control. We need to be aware of this. And one example in real life is this: bankruptcies of banks in the United States after the failure of Lehman Brothers. And that looks very similar actually to the experiment that we've seen before. Hopefully this is not an experiment. There are hundreds of banks that are failing, and it causes losses of hundreds of billions of dollars. So if we could avoid this, we would certainly want to avoid this. We should better understand what's going on in these kind of systems. Again, a similar thing happens in a blackout of an electrical power grid. So in 2006, a ship had to be transferred, and for this, one power line had to be switched off for some time. Of course, they simulated that beforehand, but one other line accidentally failed, and that was enough to trigger off a blackout that had implications all over Europe. Now, Italy, France, it started in Germany, Spain, Portugal, thousands of kilometers away. And sometimes just in the neighborhood, there's still light, and far away, there's no light. It's really difficult to understand. It's a complex system. And obviously, these things shouldn't happen, so we need to understand them better. Even more unfortunately, in the world where we have networks of networks or systems of systems, that means interdependencies between systems, we have additional vulnerabilities. And for that reason, the World Economic Forum is creating this risk interconnection map every year in order to get an overview of the interdependencies as estimated by experts. And in the meantime, it turns out that the greatest problems in the world are not of technological nature, or not even of environmental nature, but economic, social, and governance problems. So the problem here is that these are the problems that we don't understand very well. So sometimes I say we understand the universe, like the stars in the sky much better than what's going on our Earth, and that needs to be changed. Now, given that we're living in a world that's hardly predictable, there could be disruptions of all kinds, and that could actually cascade to become global problems, what can we do? Well, our society needs to be prepared to flexibly respond to anything that might happen. Adaptive response, resilience, that is what really counts. This is the only thing we can really do, prepare for adaptiveness, for resilience. And so coming back to the Gordian knot that I showed you in the beginning, what would you do? Well, what did Alexander the Great do? He cut it into pieces. And that's what we should do too. Modularity is an important design principle for complex systems to make them resilient. Unfortunately, there are quite a number of drivers of systemic risk, like we're making systems less redundant to save money, we're networking them more and more. The complexity is increasing, the dynamics is faster. We have a high pace of innovation, and often we don't know in advance will it be a good or a bad innovation, or will it be both of. And so this is kind of making us more vulnerable. On the other side, we know something about what would make systems more resilient. And this includes backup strategies, redundancies, alternatives. And for example, I wonder why we just have one financial system, just in case this fails. We're in big trouble. Should we have a second one or maybe a third one just in case? That would be very wise to have. Simplification, limitation of system size, less connectivity, decoupling strategies, diversity. Whatever happens, if you have high diversity, then most likely there will be a solution somewhere. You just need to find it and scale it up. Real-time measurement and adaptive feedback to stabilize the system, to coordinate activities in the system, transparency and awareness, accountability, and all these kind of things, suitable incentives, and collective intelligence. So we can do certain things. We need to invest into these kind of things. Our society should be organized according to these principles to make it resilient. And this is what more or less everyone, I guess, has at home. And it's protecting us from a situation where a local overload of the electrical system would burn down our house. So these are engineered breaking points. And cars have crash zones. So engineers have learned over time how to build systems that would be resilient, that would protect the most important part. Even some parts would break. No, the most important part would be protected. And so we have a tendency now towards decentralized systems. So in Europe, for example, smart grids are being built where electricity is produced locally from very different energy sources and so on. And we see it in many other systems too. So distributed control, modular design, all this is pretty good for resilience. Now there is another problem that is coming up, which is the digital revolution. And it relates to Moore's law. So you can see over here, in about 10 to 15 years' time, computers will reach brain power. And that basically means that our economy and our society will change dramatically. Even people like Elon Musk from Tesla Motors or Bill Gates have recently been alarmed and have made public statements about the dangers of artificial intelligence. There are certainly a lot of benefits too, but the most important point is we need to think about the implications and we need to prepare ourselves for this. And one of the implications is, so far, that cybercrime is exploding too. It's now costing us about $3 trillion every year. That's a hell lot of money. It should be like this, and even if that goes on like this, how much could it be? Cyber war is another worrying possibility resulting from this. So we're basically entering an age characterized by too much data, too much speed, too much connectivity, too much intelligence, as compared to a human being. Too much speed, here is a good example, the flash crash on May 6, 2010. Within a few minutes, basically, $600 billion evaporated in the stock markets. Now suppose that would have been the end of Friday afternoon. Nobody knows whether the financial system would still be there. Fortunately, the system recovered within 20 minutes. But this was not the only flash crash, actually. In the beginning, people thought that was probably a criminal act or a mistake, a fat finger kind of thing. But it turned out none of this was true, actually. this was just a cascade effect because of automated algorithmic trading. So one trade triggered off other trades, and these triggered off further trades, and so on. And it turned very serious, solid assets of big companies into penny stocks, you know. So, in other words, 1 hour later, you have a completely different ownership structure of your company. Just within 1 hour. You know. Isn't that incredible? So, big data is certainly challenging us. It allows machines to become more and more intelligent. So already many years ago, Big Blue was winning against the best chess player. And now IBM Watson is winning against the best players in game shows on TV. So we're getting into a situation where basically computers are not only the best chess players, they'll also be the best drivers, pilots, yeah, maybe also administrative staff, doctors, professors, lawyers. What else, you know? What else is in the room? So something will be happening within the next decades. And therefore, information and communication technology will fundamentally transform science, society, economy, and all our current institutions. So, for example, the way we educate. Now, people suddenly use MOOCs, massive open online courses. I think we'll be heading towards personalized education. The way we do research, suddenly there's a fourth pillar of research, like data science. The way we move, the Google cars, the way we transport goods with drones maybe, the way we go shopping already since a long time, the way we produce, for example with 3D printers, the health system with personalized medicine, politics with probably more citizen engagement, the economy with sharing economy, makers movement, and so on. Also the financial business actually, so it used to be the domain of bankers, now increasingly it's taken over by algorithmic trading, PayPal, Bitcoins, Google Wallet, and so on. Insurance, most of it is now in credit default swaps and other derivatives. And finally, even war is going to change. Yeah. So the question is, what's not going to change? And we better think about this. I don't want to be negative about it. Don't misunderstand me. Just I'm saying there's something that we need to think about. We need to prepare for. Because even a company like Kodak that actually owns most of the digital camera patents didn't survive. They couldn't transform themselves into a modern company quickly enough. And that was the end. Now this is how automobile production looks today. I don't see any worker in this picture. And in fact, there are no workers anymore. And that's why cities like Detroit, that used to be kind of big automobile cities, are in a really bad shape today. So there is a fundamental transformation process, and it relates, of course, to the way these different sectors of our economy are changing. It all started a long time ago with most people working in the agricultural sector. And now it's only 3 to 5% of people working in agriculture, because the Industrial Revolution came, right? Steam engines and so on. Well, that created, of course, new jobs eventually. That's the yellow curve. And the new sector of the economy 2.0, industrial economy. And eventually also with public schools, the service sector could grow, the economy 3.0. And now we're entering a phase where there will be an economy 4.0, a digital economy with information and knowledge production. The problem is that once we go from 1.0 to 2.0, 2.0 to 3.0, and so on, this usually comes with particular great challenges to a society, because for some time, in many cases, there are not enough jobs for everyone. In particular, if we don't prepare well enough. So we need to think about it now, because we're talking about the next 10, 20 years, where 50% of jobs are expected to be lost in the industrial sector in many countries, including Germany or France or Great Britain. So then agriculture plus industry is less than 10%. Same thing with the service sector. Also, this is going to halve, and that will be less than 30%. I mean, altogether, that's going to be, say, less than 50% in about 20 years' time. Which means that 50% of jobs have to come from this new sector of the digital economy. We need to think about how to create all these jobs. Because at the same time, many of these big IT giants now, they earn a lot of money, but they don't have a lot of employment. They don't have a lot of people working for them. So the question is, where are the jobs going to come, and how this is going to change our society? Now in Europe, we are already in a situation where some countries have more than 50% of youth unemployment. So it's not a theoretical scenario, it's already there in a sense. Yeah? And we need to wake up and find a solution. So, of course, information technology is also bringing us new solutions, fortunately. Yeah, so I wouldn't say it's bad. It just has various sides that we need to think about. And big data is certainly offering interesting new solutions. So within just 60 seconds, for example, there are 700,000 Google search queries or 500,000 Facebook posts. And then there is location data and you name it, shopping data. Everything somehow is accumulated by some companies and also secret services and so on. So the question is, what could one do with it, and what are people doing with it? So certainly one can craft instruments to explore the world, to understand it better. And we could create compasses for decision makers, and of course this is already taking place. And we suddenly are able to measure not only GDP per capita in a country with a delay of so and so many months. Well, we can break it down to city level, even quarters of cities. We could have it in real time. We could measure the health situation, the environmental situation, the education, the happiness, social capital like trust, cooperation. All these things now become measurable. So we can have a much more differentiated, better advised decision making. We can understand the spreading of international tension and conflict. We can understand the spreading of diseases and contain them better. We can even measure knowledge production and consumption in the world, and the spreading of memes, that means of certain concepts, such as physical concepts. And all of that now becomes possible, and I think that's fantastic. Even cultural spreading can be mapped. We have been looking in birth death data of notable people over a period of 2,000 years. And from that little data, you can already see so many things happening, like how really cultural spread from Constantinople to Rome to other places like Paris and so on. So eventually the entire continent was actually covered, and also after the discovery of America, you can really see how eventually it was explored by culture. Now, one question which is often raised is big data a universal tool to understand and govern the world? And that goes back to an article written by Chris Anderson, who claim that there would be the end of theory. The data deluge makes the scientific method obsolete. I mean, it's also scientists, according to this, would be kind of on the list of dying jobs. I'd like to challenge that, though, not just because I'm a scientist. But let's go through the idea, the argument. How far could we go? Could we know everything if we just measure more and more? And could we know it in real time, or could we even predict the future, like build a crystal ball with all these data? If we just collect all the data in the world, and with all this data, could we just take perfect decisions and optimize the state of the world in real time and every single minute? I mean, act like a wise king. That would be nice if that would be possible, right? But for this to happen, also, you need to be able to turn knowledge into power. And in fact, people say knowledge is power, so assuming that one could be knowing everything, could be somebody who has all this knowledge at the fingertips, could that person or institution or company be almighty? Well, for this, certainly we would need to be able to control people's decisions and actions, and one could try to do that actually with personalized information to suggest everyone what he or she should do. And given that advertisement actually is influencing our behavior, maybe that can be done to a certain extent. Now assume that could be perfectionized, and then in the end, this perfect plan based on all the data in the world would be implemented. Would such a thing work? Unfortunately, no. Well, maybe fortunately, who knows? So there are problems with this approach, and one of these problems relates to big data, that we may see patterns in the data that don't have a meaning. Like we look in the sky, we believe to see certain patterns, and it doesn't really have a meaning, according to what scientists think. Yeah? Or take this relationship. Number of serial killers per capita as a function of chocolate consumption. It would be very dangerous to live in Switzerland if this was a causal relationship, right? But this is just a spurious correlation. The data happen to be on a line, but not even fully on a line. But anyway, there are thousands, if not millions, of spurious correlations. So you might find a pattern in the data, but you don't know what does it mean. Does it mean anything? Should I act on it or not? Is there a causal interdependency behind this or not? Then there's other problems. So an insurance company wants to know what are the good risks, what are the bad risks. You need to separate the two. But usually the point clouds are on top of each other. You only know by the end of the life whether somebody was a good risk or a bad risk. And if you have to predict this, you have this kind of situation, and it turns out some people who were estimated to be a bad risk turn out to be a good risk, and vice versa. So there are errors of first and second kind, as we say, false alarms and alarms that don't go off while they should go off. That could cause discrimination. And there's another problem, errors of third kind. What model should we choose? We were talking about traffic models today, and there are hundreds of traffic models today. Suppose you choose the wrong one, like also in the case of models used in financial markets. They were underestimating risks. You can be in big trouble, and that may cost a high price, like the financial crisis cost the world $40,000 billion, and that's a high price to pay. And maybe even more important, if you optimize a system, Now, assume you have a fast enough method to do the optimization, and maybe even in real time. But there's one problem that's not answered, and nobody will answer it really. What goal function should I choose? Of course, we could maximize money or whatever, you know, but on the long run, is it the best solution? We don't know. So, in conclusion, big data allows for evidence-based decision-making and big improvements. I don't doubt this at all, but it's not an ultimate solution. And it becomes even more clear if you look into these curves, like processing power in blue is doubling every 18 months. It's an exponential increase because of Moore's law. Data volumes, however, green curve, doubling every 12 months. So what does that really mean? It implies that coming from an age where we didn't have enough data to take good decisions, we can now take much better decisions with big data, with evidence-based decision making. But there is the problem that there is a gap between data and processing power, and it will open up more and more. That means a smaller and smaller fraction of all the data that's being produced can be ever processed, evaluated. That means there's dark data that is there, but you can never look into it. You can look in any piece of data, but you cannot look into all the data at the same time. And that has important implications because that produces a flashlight effect. Yeah? You can put the spotlight on any point, but you don't see what's going on around of your spotlight. So most of the stuff you don't see, and you have really to carefully think of what should I put my spotlight on. You might overemphasize certain things while you don't see other things. So for example, while the world was focusing on fighting post-September 11 terrorism, they didn't see the financial crisis coming. While they were focusing on this, they didn't see the Arab Spring coming. While they were focusing on this, they didn't see the crisis in Ukraine coming. And also, the response to Ebola was much too late because we didn't pay attention to it. The data was there, but we didn't pay attention to it until the very last moment. Now, things are even worse or more exciting, whatever, because there's this red curve representing systemic complexity. And it means that, one day, oops, well, maybe I shouldn't have shown this, huh? One day, complexity exceeds not only processing power, but also data volume. And it shoots up even faster than these exponential increases. And the question is why? Why is this? Well, it relates to our networking of the world. And apparently, okay. So take two things. And now with the Internet of Things, we can connect these things to create a third thing. And then we have three things. We can connect these to build six things. And these six things can be connected to build 720 different things. So there is a factorial function that describes these combinatorial possibilities that are now becoming possible. And yeah, this is just overtaking any other curve. And it means that it will be more and more difficult to optimize systems in real time. And we might lose control if we try to do it in this way. But fortunately, that's not the end of the world. There is some completely new approach. Yeah? And I think it can fix our problems. And this is a scientific, data-driven approach based on smart data. So you would not just collect all the data that you can get into one big database, and then hope to find some patterns, but you would make targeted, tailored measurements, as the CERN does it. You know, the CERN, in a sense, doesn't have a classical big data approach because it throws away 99.9% of all the data that's being produced. Because they know about the dark data that they would never be able to look into again. So the question is, what data are they keeping to analyze them? The 0.1% of data. And this depends on the experiment. Now, depends on what they expect to find. So only data that would allow them to prove or disprove a certain thing in connection with this experiment is being kept. And all the other data is not of interest for this experiment, for this measurement. So we need to have a targeted measurement approach, right? And the Internet of Things is now making this possible. The Internet of Things is the enabling technology, I would say, for the 21st century. You know, for this different kind of economy and society that's going to come. It's almost magic. You can do so many things. So it can be used to create greater awareness of chances and risks, support everyone's decision making. This information can be used to develop a new kind of science to understand what's going on in the world and why. We call it global system science. We can do real-time measurement of techno-socioeconomic environmental systems, and we can use these real-time measurements to create feedback loops that would enable self-organizing systems that would create social order, cooperation, all the favorable functionalities we'd like to have based on local interactions, yeah? In a decentralized control way, you would say. It could still be supervised, of course. And finally, opportunities to create collective intelligence. So this is what we want to have, really, right? So let's give a few examples, creating more awareness for better decisions. And for this, we really need to learn eventually to see, if I do this, what will happen? If I do that, what would be the implications? So new compasses for decision makers certainly should be built. We could certainly, with all these sensing technologies, map environmental change and who causes it. We could map resources and who uses them. And we could really map the world by basically measuring everything everywhere and then putting it together depending on what we need to understand. So I personally think that participation, or we could also say crowdsourcing, is important in this context. And why? Why is this? Because it creates more capacity, more bandwidth in a sense, you know. And people are everywhere in the world, you know. So if you need to get information from any place, then yeah, people can get it for you. More creativity, better solutions, more efficiency by distributed control, more resilience by modularity, better management of complex dynamical systems by more autonomy, more jobs by personalization, creation of hybrid variety markets, and more social well-being, economic prosperity, societal resilience, collective intelligence, individual happiness, and cultural development by diversity. Just the problem is we have difficulties dealing with a large amount of diversity. So we need to be able to support compatibility and interoperability, but social information technology, this is how I call it, could help us with this. So if we would build these systems, then we could afford to have more diverse systems. Well, here is an example where it really helps. Crisis matters. You know, whenever something happens, an earthquake strikes, a volcano breaks out, a huge, massive storm strikes, whatever, people can collect the information about the impact of these disasters for you, for the crisis response team of the government, and for everyone else. So, and that happens very quickly and almost everywhere. So before you can get there with a car or a helicopter, you could have that information already. Then why do I think that participation becomes more important, and what are the preconditions for it to work well? Well, first of all, good education, access to reliable, high-quality information, access to decision support systems and services, coordination platforms, spreading of reputation systems that promote accountable and responsible behavior, and the consideration of externalities. Now, there are already some trends on the way in this direction, like open data, citizen science, recommender systems, moderated internet communities, makers movement, Internet of Things. I think all of this is driving us into that direction. So here's another example, OpenStreetMap. It started locally in one place, and within a very short time, it became a global thing. So it's basically the map of the world that's most up to date at any point in time. Because whenever there is a new street or a building site or whatever, people will put it into the database. They have 1.5 million volunteers who do it for free because they think it's important to have this and exciting to have this, and it's useful. So we could use that principle actually to reconstruct our entire world in 3D. Like tourists are taking pictures all the time. Yeah, I've done that too. And look here, all the positions of people with the camera, and I took a lot of pictures, the camera pointing into this direction, and putting it together allows you to reconstruct this building, the Colosseum in Rome, in 3D. Now, from your desk at home or at work, you don't even have to go there. Just take the vault into your office. And you can take that from any place of the world where people take pictures. That's almost every place, right? So then, all this information can be used to create this global system science that would deliver new insights, actually explanatory models, not just correlations, something that allows us why certain things happen and under what conditions they would happen. So I've been involved, for example, in modeling traffic. We have models for this, models for pedestrian crowds, for opinion formation, for coordination, for the self-organization of behavioral conventions, for the breakdown of cooperation and when cooperation comes about, for the evaluation of moral behavior, evolution of social preferences, the emergence of social norms, and the occurrence and spreading of conflict. I mean, by now we understand a lot of the problems that we're faced with. So we can take action. We can improve systems. We can mitigate problems that we've had for hundreds, if not thousands of years. I'm very serious about it. We can now do this. We can also go much better about spreading of flus and other diseases. And besides the big data approach of Google Flu Trend, there is another one which combines different data sets and data with models, an approach that we have used in a paper in Science 2013. So if you look into spatial temporal spreading of diseases, then you would get quite frustrated because it looks pretty chaotic. And the reason for this is that all of us are traveling by plane. Some of us might spread a flu or whatever. Now, considering the travel volumes by planes, we can actually define an effective distance. And that means two cities that have a lot of passengers going back and forth by plane, like Frankfurt and New York City, or Singapore and Frankfurt, or whatever, these would be pretty close in this effective distance, while other places, maybe just 100 kilometers away in geographical distance, but with very few people going back and forth, they would be far away in this effective distance. Now, if you show the very same disease spreading data in this effective distance, then you get a circular spreading pattern. Actually, so what you can do is you take the World Health Organization's infection data of a new emerging disease, and you would look at these infection data from any airport in the world, 4,000 something airports, and one of the spreading patterns would look the most circular. This identifies you the most likely outbreak location, which often in the beginning is not known, but it's important to identify the first case, and with this the reason how the disease emerged, yeah, and how to fight it and contain it. Okay, but once you have the outbreak location and you have this knowledge that it spread circular in the effective distance, then you can start and predict the spreading of the flu. You can say, okay, these are the cities that will be hit next, and those are the cities that are hit second next. So if we need to contain it, if we have limited medical resources, we put them in the cities that will be hit next. It helps to contain the disease, and in that way, this is what we did with Ebola. The industrialized countries understood eventually, it took some time, but they understood eventually that the best way to protect us from Ebola is to fight the disease in Africa, to put our resources into their place. So once we understand these systems, we can use the hidden forces behind self-organization for us. Like we have learned to control these processes, in this case explosions, and turn it into an ordered, directed motion using a motor. So we invented motors to do this, and it's a very important invention. So once we understand the forces, we can use them for us, rather than being surprised by them. We would try to turn them to our advantage, as you do it in certain kinds of Asian martial arts. You use the force created by your opponent to your own advantage. And this is what we should do with not only the forces of nature, but also the forces of social and economic systems. We just need to understand this. And I'm saying we are right there. We are now eventually understanding these things, and it allows us to build systems that are using these forces for us, creating more efficient systems, because we don't need to force the system anymore. We can let these systems work for us. So complexity science offers new approaches to address long-standing problems. And it would basically mean to go away from an approach of over-regulation to an approach of self-organization. And it requires basically the right kinds of systems designs. So surprisingly here, you can see this is a pretty fluent organization. It's not a modern traffic system though. And the reason why it works well is that if you have a particular sign with unidirectional flow in front, unidirectional flow in the opposite direction in the back, and in the middle there's a small buffer zone that allows everyone to adjust the speed such that they can cross the flow. And we could build such systems, with information technology to make them much better. And we have worked on this, actually. So first, we're simulating here stop-and-go traffic that is still annoying us. But this is just to demonstrate that we understand the process, that we can reproduce it. And I'll show you in a minute what's the reason for this stop-and-go traffic, what's triggering this. And for this, I'm turning this car into a drone or a helicopter. And now we see that there is an on-ramp, and there are a few cars that try to get on the freeway that produces small perturbations or disturbances, and these are amplified and eventually produce stop-and-go traffic. Now, some years ago, we had figured out with Volkswagen that we could equip these cars with radar sensors. They would measure the distances and relative velocities, and we could let the cars drive automatically. And we could do that in a way that would not only assist a single driver, but the entire traffic system, right? It would stabilize traffic flow, and it would increase the capacity. So it's good for everyone. It requires real-time feedback. We've done a similar thing actually for urban traffic flow. And we have figured out how to use self-organization to control traffic flows more efficiently. And to make it more clear, let us compare 3 different kinds of organization. So classically, we apply this optimal top-down control. So there's a traffic control center that's collecting all the data from the town and is trying to optimize traffic lights in real time. We would like to do this, but in fact it's usually not possible because it's an NP-hard optimization problem. It cannot be done in real time, so we have to simplify it. And what you usually do is you have a periodic service at each intersection, and you synchronize the cycles. And you do this based on typical flows at a certain time of the day and day of the week. Unfortunately, the typical flow is not representative actually for any single minute. So this flow will never exactly occur, and that's why the attempt to optimize the flow is actually not producing the optimal solution, okay? Now there could be another approach by saying, okay, let us have every single intersection separately minimize travel times based on measurement of the inflows, and then basically there's a simple formula that does it for you, yeah? This can be done, and it would correspond to the approach of the Homo economicus, basically. Yeah, each intersection would be a Homo economicus that's strictly doing the best what's possible. Yeah. And now let's see what happens. So this is for the top-down optimization attempt, and as the capacity utilization of the intersection goes up, the queue length goes up, but that's what we would expect. Okay. Now, for the Homo economicus approach, that means a local minimization of the travel times. You see, you could get a much shorter queue length. So that's actually better, and there is somehow self-organized coordination in the system. And we could say Adam Smith's invisible hand works over there. But we see here that suddenly the queue length explodes, and that means that the top-down control is better for high travel volumes. But there is an even better solution than this by looking at your impact on the neighboring intersection, I mean at external effects. And so what this approach does is also a localized optimization, because the Homo economicus approach was not good in this area. This approach, which we call other regarding optimization, local optimization, is first serving a long queue and clearing it before it goes back to travel time minimization. And this way it avoids spillover effects. It means disruptions of the traffic flow at the neighboring intersections. And in this way, it creates a coordination between neighboring intersections, and it's doing actually the best based on self-organization. So we can make the invisible hand work with real-time information, can create self-organized green waves, and much better travel times for individualized traffic, public transport, pedestrians and cyclists, and also benefits for the environment. So now the question is, could we also apply a similar approach to the economy and to the society? I mean, this is more difficult. Yeah, we need to recognize. The dream is old, like 300 years old. And Adam Smith, of course, is also known for this invisible hand. And there are some examples that show that the invisible hand sometimes fails, or it doesn't work, or it's not there, such as tragedies of the commons, environmental exploitation, overfishing, environmental pollution, and so on. But famous Nobel Prize winner Elinor Ostrom has shown that some small-scale societies have found principles to self-govern systems in an efficient way. So it is actually possible. And so we need to look basically into the cooperation problems and see, are there any mechanisms that would create cooperation automatically using kind of the internal forces of a social system. And in fact, there are a number of such mechanisms that would transform a social dilemma situation into something else that allows cooperation to happen. And one of them, this mechanism is direct reciprocity. That means I help you, you help me. Or peer punishment. That means if you don't comply with the rules, with the social norms, that I would punish you, or you would punish me if I don't do this. And that is actually quite effective, but it's expensive. And so we have looked into the competition of different kinds of cooperation supporting mechanisms. And it turns out that signaling can be more efficient than punishment if you have the right kind of implementation. And there are other mechanisms too, like merit-based matching, where kind of cooperative people would interact with cooperative people and less cooperative people with less cooperative people. And this is not only better for the cooperative people, but altogether it's creating a trend towards more cooperation in the entire economy and society. So this is really an exciting discovery. And besides that, it's not only making our systems more efficient, it's also reducing undesirable inequality. So I would say, like 300 years after its invention, we can make the invisible hand work using the Internet of Things. Yeah, and some of the mechanisms that we can increasingly use is indirect reciprocity, that means reputation systems, and the social information technology that I was mentioning before. I won't go into details, but you should imagine them as personal digital assistants that help you to interact more successfully with other people, avoid conflict, and engage into successful deals, let's say. And most importantly, what we found is it's important to take into account external effects if you want the system to self-organize successfully and create a favorable outcome. So then the question is, if I skip this for a matter of time, collective intelligence. The question is, how would we build such a system that would give us all the real-time information needed? And actually, it's not as complicated as you would think. So all it takes is you and your smartphone. Of course, we can connect these smartphones with each other to exchange information. We've thought about ways to build these systems in a way we could trust them by giving control to each individual user over these different sensors that are in the smartphone. You can turn on and off and decide whether you want to share the data or not, or with whom. And so we could turn this Internet of Things into a planetary nervous system. We could do that together. And we could create interfaces to control the data. I've also done some thinking about how to build the system in a way that the state could trust the system. And so I think it's possible to create an open data resource, a real-time data stream for everyone. And that would be a participatory system. It's extremely exciting to build this, and it's actually a lot of fun, so we can build games, you can gamify the city, you can do a lot of things. And we are also giving a lot of creative possibilities in order to allow you to come up with your own ideas and contribute to this system. And with the micropayment system, we could even establish your own business with this and collaborate with others. So why don't we do this together, right? It would be a system built on fair play and give and take. So you can take data, but in order for the system to work, you would have to give some data back. You could take source codes to do certain measurements, but if you change the source code to come up with some new application, you should also give it back to everyone. So we would together grow an information, innovation, and production ecosystem. The more people participate in this, the more possibilities would be created. And that would create all the jobs that we would have to create in the future. So this would create new opportunities for everyone. If well set up, enabling users, customers, citizens will lead to better services, better products, better businesses, better neighborhoods, smarter cities, and smarter nations. And we can make our societies more resilient too. So here an example, acceleration data measured with my smartphone. You know, if we all would open up this accelerometers in our smartphones, then we could together measure incidents of earthquakes and have our smartphones warn our friends, our colleagues, our family. And then certainly we'd like to have some survival kit that helps us in situations of crisis. And in a hackathon that I organized in San Francisco, in an area where earthquakes might happen anytime, these computer programmers came up with an entirely new organization that engaged people from the bottom up. And these are basically tomorrow's survival kits. This is Charge Beacon that would allow you to charge your smartphone even if electricity is off. This is an application by Amigo Cloud to record things that are broken, like a bridge that is broken down, a street that doesn't work, a building that's damaged, whatever. And this is an app, Helping Hands, allowing you to organize help for each other. That means to help each other with new information technology. So get ready, team up with your friends and colleagues, join the NervousNet community today, and then we can make the magic happen. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Helbing. I guess in the constraint time, unless we have one short question. Yes.
Right here. So in such a global nervous system, what would be the place of the traditional, say, institutions such as the state and its?
Yeah, I think it makes a lot of sense if the state would kind of run such a system and would set it up. Yeah. Then the functionality would certainly be compatible with what a society needs to ensure, that you have mechanisms that would support social order and not undermine it. So we don't want to have a system that creates chaos, but we want to have a system that creates more efficient systems and that allows us to come up with new products and with better environments in neighborhoods and all this. And so basically this system would allow us to take on board many ideas of many people, and what it takes is a coordination of all these ideas. So it would be transformed into something which is compatible and that's creating a benefit for everyone and not just for a few people. And from that point of view, I think this can be extremely useful tools for the society, for the economy, and for the citizens. So we can create a win-win-win situation.